Marvel don't call themselves the House of Ideas for nothing, so it's fairly obvious to say that they've published some truly amazing comic books over the years. Sure, Daredevil's involved in most of them, but there are dozens of other Marvel heroes who starred in their own seminal storylines. Some old, others new. That makes the task of ranking all of the company's greatest hits, much like getting my father Jules home after he's had a Bengali too many, a fairly formidable one to say the least. You see, unlike DC, who got in on the concept of graphic novels fairly quickly in the wake of Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, Marvel weren't so quick. Consequently, a whole bunch of the company's classic tales tend to get lumped into big collections of years-long runs. To find the true greats, as we'd envision them, then becomes a tricky thing. That doesn't mean that they're not there, of course. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The likes of Frank Miller, pre-2000s Miller specifically, just saying, Garth Ennis, Chris Claremont, and more all made a home at the company in various decades, producing genre-defining works that further built upon the legacy Marvel constructed during the bullpen era of the mid to late 60s. With that in mind, I'm Yoon from What Culture, and here are 10 Marvel graphic novels you must read before you die. Crikey, that's a bit ominous, isn't it? Number 10. Punisher Max, In the Beginning. Garth Ennis' stint on The Punisher might have given us some kooky moments over the years, like that time he conditioned a polar bear to kill a mob boss. Yeah. But anyway, there's no denying it carried a sense of gravity when it had to. One story arc that best exemplifies this actually takes place in the first volume of Punisher Max. Said arc, called In the Beginning, features Frank Castle as he attempts to outmaneuver both the mob and an off-the-books Black Ops team, one that features Micro, played against Type, in a somewhat antagonistic role. Ennis is afforded plenty of room to maneuver too, as the book is set outside of the typical 616 timeline. Not only did this allow him to depict violence in a Tarantino-y, heavily stylized manner, it also allowed him to tell the Punisher story he wanted to, one that revisited the character's origins and fundamentally rewrote the sense of pathos that had carried him so diligently since that first encounter with Spider-Man in 1973. It's a really important book, and while other storylines like Bourne and Valley Forge undoubtedly have their merits, you have to go back to the beginning to get a sense for where it all started. Number 9. Captain America, The Winter Soldier. Not only is The Winter Soldier the best MCU movie out there, like I will literally fight anyone who says otherwise, it's also the best Captain America comic too. That's no easy feat, mind. Among the many writers and artists who have lent their talents to the character include Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, and Steve Englehart. Poor old Ed Brubaker then had a lot to live up to. But here's the thing, he lived up to it all and then some, providing audiences with a defining image of Captain America in the 21st century, and doing it all while constructing an equally seminal stint on Daredevil at the same time. That's amazing, and while the writer has gone on to pastures new to pursue creator-owned works at Image, history will show that his time with Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes et al. Was the best the character's ever gone. Together with artist Steve Epting, Brubaker took the bold decision to revive Cap's World War II sidekick Bucky Barnes and turn him into a brainwashed Soviet assassin, called the Winter Soldier. What followed was a classic arc in which, slowly but surely, Bucky would return to Cap's side and indeed, even succeed him as the new Star-Spangled Man with a plan. There are plenty of standout moments from Brubaker's run, but that first Winter Soldier arc has to be the best. Number 8. A.K.A. Jessica Jones, ALIAS. With the news that Brian Michael Bendis is set to end his 18-year-long partnership with Marvel, it seems apt to include one of his books in a list of the publisher's all-time greats. And of course, Jessica Jones today is one of Marvel's most popular characters. Without Bendis' work on the title during the early 2000s, it's likely like that wouldn't be the case. More importantly, if you do go back and read Alias, and you should, let's face it, you'll find that it has all the gravity the Netflix series has in spades. It has its problematic moments, certainly, but Bendis' tale of a former superhero turned PI struggling to survive in New York is as timeless as it is intuitive. Others will likely highlight the writer's stint on Daredevil, a run second only to Frank Miller's in terms of quality, BTW, and Spidey, but Jessica Jones is a Bendis creation through and through. It's also highly influential, and while barbs will inevitably be made regarding the writer's seemingly verbose style, the way he kickstarted the millennium at Marvel was massive. As far as Marvel heroes go, you'll struggle to find one as compelling as Jessica Jones. Number 7. X-Men, Dark Phoenix Saga. No other comics property exemplifies just how inaccessible the medium is than the X-Men. Everyone's favourite mutants are literally drowning in decades worth of convoluted cosmic storylines, and while the Dark Phoenix does little to amend such problems, it is definitive, and undoubtedly one of the finest X-Men tales ever told. Chris Claremont and John Byrne's seminal X-Men text is everything fans of the 90s cartoon want to see in a comic book. Although adapted for that very series, The actual comic itself is far more ambitious in scope, bringing together the two biggest cosmic forces in the Marvel Universe, the Kree and the Skrull, as the X-Men face an uphill battle to save Jean from the Shi'ar Empire, and, more importantly, from herself. The book, following on from the original Phoenix Saga, takes place as Jean finds the Phoenix Force inside her impossible to control, courtesy of the villainous mastermind who'd psychically manipulated the X-Man into thinking she was the aristocratic ancestor of the Hellfire Club's most famous patron, the Black Queen. Ooh, that's a doozy. Imbued with this newfound dark personality, the Force inside Jean bursts free and sends her careering across the cosmos, until she annihilates an entire planet full of people. On accident, we should probably clarify. It's tragic, iconic, and a brilliant X-tale all around. Don't let the films tell you otherwise. Number 6, Black Panther, Declined. Christopher Priest pretty much wrote the book on Wakanda, the lore of Black Panther more generally, and made staples of Everett Ross, portrayed by Martin Freeman in the MCU, and White Tiger, as well as villains Killmonger and Venom. The writer's run is seminal in so many ways, and while the character has had his fair share of dynamite runs over the years, none have quite managed to eclipse Priest's. While it took a while for Marvel to alert to that fact, owing to, the book being out of print for almost 10 years, fans of Priest's saga won't need reminding that the book, satirical, tense, and jam-packed with drama, is one of Marvel's very best. The first volume, Declined, even looks to be influencing the plot of the upcoming Black Panther film, so be sure to get in on the hype before it releases this February. Number 5, Marvels. You only have to utter the words Alex and Ross sequentially to get comics fans excited, with the artist's photorealistic style having made him a standout over others in the medium. He's one of the industry's most recognizable talents, and while he's mainly done cover work for the past few years, Ross is able to boast a fine bibliography of comic book greats, including Kingdom Come on DC's end, and Marvels on, well, Marvels. The book, released in 1994 and written by Kurt Busiek, centers around everyday photographer Phil Sheldon. Its genius, however, truly lies in its historical motif, with the writer electing to follow Sheldon not from a contemporary angle, but from 1939 onwards. Doing so affords Ross the ability to illustrate the Marvel Universe right on through World War II, all the way up to the bullpen era of the 60s, and it looks magnificent. Providing readers with another perspective from which to observe Marvel's most iconic events, Marvel stands out today for being one of the most unique books in their company catalogue. No true believer should be without it. Number 4, Spider-Man, The Death of Jean DeWolff. There are countless Spider-Man tales worthy of a spot on Marvel's all-time greatest comics, so much so that the character lacks what many would consider to be a definitive text. If any comic could lay claim to that title, however, it would be Peter David's The Death of Jean DeWolff. Originally published in 1985, the storyline, David's first ever, proved to be an instant hit, following Peter Parker as he unravels the murder of his close friend Jean DeWolff, who, for some time, had been a regular feature in Spidey's comics. A detective with the NYPD, DeWolff was one of the few characters who knew Spider-Man for his masked persona alone, and following her introduction a decade earlier, she'd become something of a fan-favourite character. Imaginably, David's decision to axe her off proved to be controversial at the time. Fortunately for readers, the writer managed to use the death to convey a truly compelling tale that focused on Spider-Man at his worst, angry, alone, and hell-bent on catching the person who murdered his friend. Daredevil also features, which is always a bonus in my book, and David does some really interesting stuff with him and Peter, but it's the thematic strength of the title that makes it stand out above other Spidey tales. It's about revenge, it's about the ordinary, and in the period where Spidey was being teleported across the cosmos, it's very, very important. Number 3, Iron Man, Demon in a Bottle. Demon in a Bottle is truly something to behold, if not because of its iconic status, then because it's just a fine storyline all around. Written by David Michelinie and Bob Layton, the book addresses Tony Stark's alcoholism head-on, pulling apart the character's struggle with drink in the wake of a series of increasingly awful events. The key thing here is that it isn't Justin Hammer, Whiplash, or some other supervillain who's the antagonist of the story, but Tony's addiction instead. And although Marvel had never certainly been strangers to portraying taboo subjects in their comics, Michelinie and Layton's storyline was fairly groundbreaking when it first released. It is, by all means, the most iconic Iron Man story ever told. It might not be flashy or gargantuan, or filled with plenty of action sequences, but it is uniquely human. Given Stark's metallic disposition, that element, above all others, grants it a salience few other comics can match. Number 2, The Infinity Gauntlet. You don't have to be a comic book reader to understand the gravity of Jim Starlin and George Perez's Infinity Gauntlet. Released in 1991 to instant acclaim, the storyline centered around Thanos who, having recently requisitioned the Infinity Gems into one golden gauntlet, wiped out half the sentient life in the galaxy at the snap of his fingers. The surviving members of the Marvel Universe weren't all too pleased with the intergalactic titan, so a coalition, led by a newly resurrected Adam Warlock, set out to face him. Things don't end quite the way the heroes might have hoped, with Thanos' omnipotence affording them little chance of survival, but that's sort of the point. The book was envisioned as a means of fundamentally altering the status quo, and the Mad Titan, then a relatively unknown villain, was the character to do it. Starlin's text is suitably terrifying, and Thanos, now on the cusp of making his full cinematic debut, has been a Marvel mainstay ever since. There's not a book in Marvel's library that possesses the same scope or quality as Infinity Gauntlet, and while it might look a tad intimidating on the surface, you really don't need to know much before hopping in, particularly if you've been keeping up with the MCU for the last decade. Number 1. Daredevil, Born Again. As far as comics go, they don't get any better or more definitive than Born Again. Released in 1986, the same year Frank Miller would publish The Dark Knight Returns, ooh, get him, Born Again details Matt Murdock's systematic destruction at the hands of Wilson Fisk, New York's self-anointed kingpin of crime. Miller literally tears Daredevil down to build him back up again, sending him through the fires of Hell's Kitchen to emerge renewed, revitalized, and of course, reborn. Like later Daredevil tales, Born Again roots itself in the religious experience of Matt Murdock's life. Dave Mazzucchelli's panels pay direct homage to Catholic imagery throughout, and the narrative behind Matt Murdock's resurrection is, while set during the holiday months, a blatant a nod as any to Christ's return. This isn't to say that Daredevil is Marvel's Jesus, so to speak, or indeed to say that Born Again's defining elements are its religious ones. What is important, however, is that Miller truly gets a feel for the character, as does Mazzucchelli, who again, painstakingly layers the Man Without Fear's defining characteristics in panel after panel of sublime illustration. It's thematically complex, character-defining in so many ways, and iconic in even more. And while it's true you could fill up an entire list of must-reads with Daredevil comics, Born Again simply has to be the one everyone reads. It's too good not to be. And that's our list. Myth that we've missed any in particular? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and while you keep things civil, be sure to head back over to whatculture.com for more list-based shenanigans every day. I've been Ewan, and I'll see you next time. Congrats, you made it to the end of this comics video. To my left there are 2 more that you might fancy watching. Beneath you can subscribe as always, and to my right there are 2 other What Culture channels that you might be interested in looking at.